Assistant Superintendent Darren Nielsen. Is there anyone else you want to bring up?
We do have a few members of our committee that are here. If you'd like them to join me at the table, I would love
This is, if you want to invite them up and recognize them, that would be fine.
Well, since you're already at the table.
Okay, Assistant Superintendent Darren Nielsen, would you please introduce yourself and your group here?
Yes, thank you. And again, Darren Nielsen, Assistant Superintendent of Student Learning. And I sit at the table as your employee, but also today privileged to be a member of the School Leadership Working Group. And we have a couple of members of that committee as well who are joining us. We have Aaron Popham from formerly BYU, correct me if I'm wrong, BYU. And then Valerie, used to be Shaw, Bergera, I apologize about that. She's a school principal for Granite School District and previously with Salt Lake City School District. And then we have Kathleen Reby, your colleague, who was on the committee, and then Linda Hansen as well. Other members were invited. They come from all over the state, so it's difficult for them to come here for this presentation, but we're happy to represent the group with the recommendations that we're coming to the board with. It was about a year ago that this board organized and gave an assignment to create the School Leadership Working Group. I think it was last November. We got organized in December and had our first meeting in January. And some of you might have been wondering where we went and if we were ever coming back, because it's been quite a while. We engaged in the assignments that we were given with all seriousness and put in a lot of work, and again come to you with some recommendations that we'll talk to here shortly. It's important to bring back the context of this group's assignment because it's easy to have scope creep, to borrow a terminology from technology, and you can get working on things and start to expand the responsibilities that you have. So we were given the task to analyze current efforts and programs that are improving school leadership, create an implementation timeline for revised educational licensure and credential, to review and recommend improvements in educational leadership induction, and then bring those recommendations back to this board as not only on those topics, but overall how to support and improve school leader quality in the state of Utah. Some of the analyzing that we did are these 6 items on the board. We looked at research from the Wallace Foundation, the RAND Corporation. We involved our partners with WestEd. We used resources from the Council of Chief State School Officers. We looked at information that Granite School District uses with the George W. Bush Presidential Center on School Leadership Initiative. And then we surveyed our current school administrators last April and received over 300 responses to that. The recommendation that we have for the timeline, you can see this is a pretty aggressive timeline, and it's established not only by the committee but also in consultation with Travis Rollins, who would be responsible for moving this forward. And so one of our recommendations is to adopt this timeline moving forward for license and credential. I'm going to jump out of this document and move into the one that has the recommendations on in your board docs, because the rest of these recommendations have some detail that we've provided with them that might answer questions to board members. There are some of these recommendations that seem kind of mundane, and then there are at least 3 of them that are pretty significant and would change the landscape of school leadership in the state of Utah, which I think was part of the initiative and the drive that we had assignment. So recommendation number 1, develop, adapt, or adopt a school leader performance assessment that will allow candidates for the principalship to demonstrate their leadership knowledge and skills prior to receiving credential and license. It's easy to jump to a conclusion and picture that assessment is similar to a praxis test, because when we talk about professional licensing and assessment, our teachers are used to experiencing this praxis test. We're talking, and this committee is recommending something more comprehensive than that, and that's this performance assessment that we would need to either develop, adapt, or adopt from existing ones that are out there. So along with that, as I talked to the superintendents earlier this week, they had lots of questions about this specific to the current rule that requires 400 hours of internship to be able to qualify for your license and endorsement. Along with this recommendation is the recommendation that we remove hours from the license requirement and tie everything to competencies. This also would allow us to continue to support, or maybe support in a better way, multiple paths to the principalship while still having a set of standards that all of us who are given the responsibility to lead our children and our teachers are held accountable to and need to demonstrate competency for. You'll see quite a few details there associated with that. Recommendation number 2 is to seek funding and establish a scholarship similar to the T.H. Bell Scholarship Program, only for school administrators. And that's to purposefully increase the number of principal candidates from underrepresented communities that exist in our state. Recommendation number 3, direct the superintendent to create a list of resources that would be targeted towards candidates or individuals in the field who are interested or considering becoming a school leader, that would give them information that could direct their actions to make them prepared to enter that program. Number 4, 5, 6, 7, I'll talk about the principal preparation program. And again, some of our programs are already doing these. There's confidential recommendation form, a weighted application tied to specific or benefiting people who have leadership experiences. MTSS framework being included in the curriculum, and then also to build in meaningful experiences across the entire preparation program. So it's important to note the committee, this working group values experiential learning and isn't recommending that candidates don't have experiences. It's just removing the requirement for hours out of that rule, and again, tying it to competencies. This one's a big one. Recommendation number 8 would be to seek funding and establish a school leadership development grant that could assist LEAs in their role in improving the principal pipeline, providing meaningful job-embedded experience for school leader candidates, provide 3 years of high-quality mentorship for every leader, and support principal supervisors to ensure there's a continuous cycle of improvement for all of our school leaders. Some of the details of what the group talked about that we thought were highly valuable in terms of this grant are listed there below, and we can address questions on that, but I'm going to scroll on down to recommendation number 9. Have the superintendent create and publish a model principal mentoring framework that LEAs could either adopt or adapt if they don't already have, or if they already have an effective model, wouldn't necessarily force a change on that. Number 10, direct USB staff to facilitate school principal mentor training to LEA principal supervisors, something that we don't currently do in our office. We've identified some performance measures, understanding that if we are directed to go before the legislature and request funding, we would need to also have performance measures to be able to determine whether the strategies that we implement are effective, and some of those ideas are listed there. Fiscal requests, so recommendation number 11 is that the Board of Education direct staff to create a business case regarding the details related to the fiscal note associated with these requests, and have that prepared to be submitted for the 2020 legislative session. We've provided some context of what type of things would need to be included or at least considered on that fiscal note and business case. And then we get down into the supporting school leader quality and ongoing recommendations 12 through 15. None of these are significant in terms of cost. We have some structures in place. Recommendation number 12, utilize the principal support network to provide all school principals opportunities to collaborate cross-district with each other. That process has already begun, and we're starting to develop that under the direction of David Smith. Number 13 is to take a look at our relicensure requirement. Educators are required to obtain 200 points in their relicensure application every 5 years. And the direction of this committee is to look at that and increase the rigor on it. That school principals should probably have activities that are directly related to their employment responsibilities for those to count as points towards their relicensure. Number 14, to continue to collaborate with LEAs, higher ed, the state board, UEN, other professional organizations to provide a menu of skill-specific and evidence-based professional learning experiences. Those those activities are already in place here. We could expand on those. And then number 15, just to create this depository of principal professional learning resources. On both of those, where we talk about resources, we reference the ULEAD program that Mikkel Weathers directs out of this office, that structure is already in place to do that. So those are easy lifts. That's a lot of requests in a very short period of time, and I expect there's probably questions that you might want us to address.
Okay, we have a few board member questions and comments. We'll start with Board Member Cannon.
Thank you. I was happy to see this and applaud all the work that's gone into it. My question is probably underneath here, but one thing that's really important to me is that our principals are charged with the evaluation of our teachers and having qualified teachers in every classroom, and they're charged with the evaluation of those teachers. So I'd like to know, how does that particular element go through what you're trying to do here? I didn't see it stated specifically, so I wonder if you'd point that out to me.
Yeah, so let me give you a couple of suggestions, places that could show up or would likely show up. If we go back to our performance assessment, we're recommending that assessment be based on the competencies associated with the Utah Educational Leadership Standards, which include effectively evaluating and coaching and giving feedback to teachers. If we were to look at the Massachusetts School Leadership Performance Assessment, one of their components that's measured is their ability to effectively evaluate and give feedback to to teachers. And so that's part of the competencies they have to demonstrate as they enter the field. In an ongoing way, we currently have a rater certification, so outside of this recommendation, but there's a rater certification process that principals go through either within their own LEA or sponsored through the state to validate that they're competent in evaluating teachers. But you're right, I think every teacher should feel entitled to have effective evaluation and good feedback to help them. They should expect that, and we should be able to provide that through their principals.
Okay, did you have a follow-up, or you got?
Just tell me, please, exactly where the document, the part was that you were referring to?
Yeah, so it would, if we were talking specifically, it would be up under recommendation number 1, and then 1A talks about where we're going to assess, what we're going to use to determine what are we going to assess. So it's not called out by name, but that's where that's found, is under those educational leadership standards.
Okay. Vice Chair Brittany Cummins.
I understand that you took an update of some of this work to the Legislative Interim Committee fairly recently. I'm curious if any of their response or conversations with you were considered in these recommendations that you're bringing today.
Okay, it's a great question. When we presented to the legislature back in August, the committee didn't have their work fine-tuned, so what we focused on there was where we were on the idea stage and the levers that the Wallace Foundation identifies that state leaders can use to improve school leadership in their states. So in terms of the performance assessment, that was not mentioned previously to the legislature. There was some dialogue there, some questions about alternate paths to becoming a principal. One of the members on that committee talked about that, and that would relate to this because if the board chooses to move forward with this, you'll see under 1E, we indicate that the development of this assessment and the use of school leader performance assessments would support multiple routes to the principalship while also ensuring schools, all Utah schools are led by highly effective principals. So it wouldn't matter how you get there to the point where you're going to take the performance assessment. You might come out of business or military or some other way, and if you can demonstrate that you're prepared, then through this model, then they would be able to get a license. That affects a lot of things outside of our power maybe right now, but that's the thinking that the working group was engaged in.
Do you have a follow-up? Okay. Board Member Belknap.
So Darren, from a conversation we had earlier, how will this affect charter school directors who aren't licensed educators and haven't been?
Yeah, so it's not addressed in here, but it's typical practice that when you institute something new like this, there's a grandfather clause. I don't know if that's a direction the board would go. So those who are currently in the profession wouldn't need to go back and take the test. That would be up to the board and other entities of authority. Moving forward, the working group's belief was that somebody who wants to, a charter school wants to hire, right now the rule allows them to not be a licensed administrator or licensed educator even. The working group believes that putting this kind of structure in place would actually allow you to not worry about them not being an educator, but still have a standard.
License.
Still have a standard that says when you enter the school system, we expect you to have these competencies as you work with our teachers and our students.
Did you have a follow-up?
A lot, but not now.
Any other questions, comments from the board? I just want to comment. I'm really impressed with the detail of your recommendations. I'll be reporting later on school fee task force, and I'm like, man, maybe I didn't. Mine's really a Reader's Digest version report, but I thought you did a really good job with taking the mystery out of things and with the detail here. So thank you and your working groups putting these recommendations together. Superintendent Dixon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just, I want to reemphasize the importance of school leaders on, all of my visits. Of course, I'm interacting with amazing school leaders, and Principal Valerie was one of those where, you have people on the committee like Valerie who have just done tremendous work in schools with a lot of challenges, and have shown that by setting expectations and the culture and climate that kiddos who come to us with a lot of challenges can achieve at high levels, not just achieve, but achieve at high levels, and bringing community and supporting families where they're at, and all of those critical components are the things that we want to see from our principals. In places where our schools are struggling, we talk to districts who say we've got to have principals who are really well prepared and supported, and they make all the difference. And I just think we've underscored leadership so often, and I'm so proud to be able to support a working group that has come up with some robust plans and ideas for this board to consider. Sometimes we're afraid to go bold. I like the go big or go home concept, and I think it's just time that if we want our kids to achieve, we've got to invest and put policy in place that supports really effective school leaders. So thanks to the working group on behalf of staff and educators as well.
Okay, Assistant Superintendent, if you might comment on this request. Most likely there'll be a motion to accept these recommendations, but just to manage everyone's expectations, this isn't the end of a lot of work.
No.
This is the beginning, and so what are your expectations on as this thing moves forward? This is a big lift, very significant, of how to and best way to update the board as this is progressing. Do you have recommendations? I'm curious on your recommendations. We included in our superintendent's report on the updates to make sure this stays a priority in moving this forward. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, you're right. This is essentially you guys setting a direction for the state, really our partners in higher ed, employees in the state board, professional organizations that have interest in school leadership, from USEL to the Elementary and Secondary Principals Association. So this recommendation, these recommendations, if you move forward with those, it gives us direction. And then the business case, it's heavily dependent on additional funding. A significant ask that we'll go back to the legislature to ask for. When we met with them in August, at the end, we said one thing you should know is that we anticipate we'll be coming back and requesting funding, give you a chance to support your interest in school leadership with money to really move the needle. So how they'll respond to that, I don't know, but we did prep them that at some point we expected to come back with an ask. So it's dependent on that. So the big work would be the licensing. Obviously, is that's an immediate timeline that would begin right away and hopefully proceed. If it goes as fast as this, it would be amazing. The teacher licensing, I know, it's taken quite a bit longer than this, and the principal one might not go quite as fast as we've targeted. The business case, though, getting the details of that established, then I would hope we would bring that back at least as an information item to the board before we're prepared to take that to the legislature to make sure it still aligns with your will and your desires and fits into the scope of the big picture of all the different things that you guys have responsibility for.
Okay, thank you. Vice Chair Brittany Cummins.
So with that conversation about seeking for funding, as we all know, sometimes we get portions of things that we ask for. Is there maybe a plan kind of on the sidelines of how you move forward with most or some of this in sections if full funding isn't available for this plan?
Yeah, I don't know that we have a plan yet. We're still just finishing the dreaming phase, right? The hope, the aspiration phase. The three things that are financial based for sure. The performance assessment, there would be a significant cost with that because now we need to have a high degree of reliability on the test itself, the scoring, the validating of it, so that if somebody doesn't pass those competencies, we can say with confidence that it was a reliable tool that was used. So that's heavily dependent on funding. The grant program that we have that would provide support to our LEAs to help take a number of things, but primarily to take these candidates who are going into the preparation programs. Their coursework is requiring experiences as part of their individual courses and allow LEAs to have money to buy substitutes or other resources that allow them to have authentic experiences. It's been one of the biggest things we've heard across the state for a number of years now is that the internship experience varies widely across the state depending on the LEA that a person is in, a candidate is in. And so there's widespread acceptance that that's got to be fixed. And this does that. The grant then would provide a way to support LEAs to help their candidates get there. So that's dependent on the business case. We're recommending to use the same model that the K-3 funding provided in a way, and that is to have the LEA matching portion. One thing that's different than the K-3 is we've built into here a structure that recommends consortiums. Charter schools, for instance, can't often work independently. They're not large enough. And also our rural school districts to support grant applications for these consortiums to get together to pool these resources. And then the final one is that TH-Bell idea to create a scholarship to help get a wider representation of our community into the principalship. Those three are highly dependent. And then the performance assessment would require an additional FTE here at the state to be able to support that. So those are the fiscal notes. I don't know, again, I mentioned we don't really have a plan B right now. I charged the committee, let's just talk about what would be best, and then we'll worry about the money piece afterwards. Let's shoot for what we think would make the biggest difference.
Can I just follow
Okay,
up?
follow up.
I guess the question with that, and I agree, it's always nice to just say, here's the big picture and how we want to go forward. But as we pace out, because obviously I think I read in there that you would look for that funding in the 2020 legislative session. Can you begin the rule writing process if you're not sure if certain aspects of it are going to be funded? So, for example, the assessment that's going to require funding in order to develop, if there's no funding available, so worst case scenario, there's no funding available, would we be able to do some of the rule writing work prior to that request, or kind of what's that plan of going forward, working, hoping for the best, but what are some things that we can't do if we don't know for sure if the funding's been secured?
Yeah, so if the rule still focuses on competencies, then we don't get funding for an assessment, then we're in a position where we've set an expectation. So Missouri, for instance, has a similar model where they don't have an assessment, but they have these expectations of competencies. They're just not measuring them. So that might be, if you're talking about what if it doesn't all come together. I think moving forward with competencies identified in the rule, there's widespread support for that. And that wouldn't require additional funding to at least declare these are the competencies we expect all school administrators to have. Take our standards and operationalize those into competencies. and then work with our higher ed partners to modify the curriculum so it becomes more performance-based.
Okay. Board Member Reby?
So I was a part of this group, and it was kind of exciting to see people from every level of our school system having a conversation about it. And, you know, as we made our recommendations, we looked to see what we thought was not effective. So we also looked to see at leadership which wasn't effective and decided to try to mold those things out of the situation. So we had a lot of conversations about which things worked, and we went to many different states to look at their models. So we had some hybrid ideas. We had some really top-down heavy ideas. But I think that as a state, we have some good things in place already that we could probably tweak and modify to meet the recommendations that we have. And as those are successful, we might be able to move more aggressively forward on some of our bigger ideas. But I've been through the leadership training, and I have a certificate in leadership. And to think about some of the things I was required to do to get that certificate really wasn't meaningful at all. And so by just putting language, I mean, some of the little things that we have recommended would make a big difference in our schools. So the big things will make a bigger difference, but even the small things that we recommend would make a big difference in our schools.
Board Member Lear?
I had a question for Darren, or the other members of your committee. I admit to having looked closely at the recommendations, but skimming the report. So if it's in there, I'm guilty of being a lazy reader. But I'm wondering if this is intended, if these recommendations are intended to go forward replacing the current higher ed graduate programs. Are the higher ed programs proposed to be phased out? Are you intending to convert the higher ed programs? I mean, not literally, but figuratively convert them to your way of thinking. How does this work with the existing programs that are probably pretty well developed and supported?
Yeah, so what if I defer to Aaron on this as a higher ed partner that we have who was in the group? We had representations from SUU and the University of Utah, so.
I appreciate the question, Board Member Lear. You're absolutely right. We have very well-developed master's programs in leadership. But just like in teacher preparation, we recognize that all of our candidates are coming and receiving your license. And we will look to be partners with the board in making sure that we're working together to prepare the highest quality candidates possible. And so we would be looking at these, and we greatly appreciate the invitation to be a part of this. And we feel that our thinking is invested into these recommendations, and we are willing to react to these recommendations and improve our programs. For example, the recommendation to remove the hours. That's been a really long and debated issue for many years. And we're excited to hear that we're looking at these competencies because we're able to then shape these experiences that we're going to provide for our candidates in ways that meet those competencies, and we're not restricted by hours.
So just to make sure I heard you, can I follow up for a minute, Chair?
Yeah, one follow-up.
It sounds like you're going to be working with the higher ed programs. They'll be working together, higher ed programs changing, adapting, depending on the funding we get to
Absolutely.
then kind of move in the directions of these recommendations.
Yes,
It's not
yes,
going to
ma'am.
be, it's not going to be any kind of territorial, this is the way we've always done it.
Well, I can't speak 100% for all the prep and programs in the state. And there will always be some pushback. I mean, that's higher ed, that's how we act. But we
No, you delay.
but we do see this as an opportunity to be a partner in this process.
Okay.
And I would argue that some of these recommendations are directly our recommendations to
Good.
improve the preparation
Thank
of our
you.
principals
I
here.
taught in one of these programs for 20-plus years, and I was impressed by the candidates, but I definitely felt like we had lots of work to do to make it more relevant. So thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Valerie, do you have anything to add? Because I'm sensing this is coming to probably emotions will be coming. You showed up here, you came to the table. I know you're sacrificing something to be here. Do you have anything you want to add? We'd have to turn that mic on. Not to put you on the, you can say no, and we're fine.
There you go.
I just think it was a great opportunity, and I agree with the recommendations because even right now, I have a person who's going through that program, an internship program, and getting her license. And I just look at how some changes to some of these things would be giving all candidates who are trying to be school administrators, future administrators, better experiences instead of just checking boxes that hours are complete and I've done this. We're actually really giving leadership opportunities so that when people are in positions, when they become school administrators, that they actually feel like they are prepared and it's not a shock to all of a sudden encounter some of these things that are happening in a school, and really being able to stay up with what's happening in schools so that you can lead. We expect a lot from teachers. We ask teachers to do a lot of different things, and I think we need to have the same expectations for leaders that are in our schools and in our districts. As they're asking for teachers to make changes and to move things forward, we need to expect the same thing from the leader in the building.
Okay, well, thank you. Vice Chair Brittany Cummins.
I'd like to move that we accept the school leadership work group recommendations.
We have a motion and a second to accept the school leadership working group recommendations. Discussion to the motion. Board Member Reby.
I speak in support of that motion as well. And in bullet point 2, it talks about a pipeline, and the pipeline involves aggressively looking for people instead of just having people step up to the plate. So when we aggressively look to find the leaders in our school, we actually give them a conduit for succeeding and being a part of this process. In the past, if you didn't have the money or the resources or, the time, you kind of felt like this isn't for me. But now we are going to be asking people to step up, and we're going to give them a conduit with that grant. So I think it's a really great step in the right direction of creating a better leadership.
Okay. Vice Chair Ellis.
I just have a point of clarification. When we're looking at our charter schools, what type of impact will this have on the directors or the principals? Will they have, will this force them into a situation where they have to then become licensed?
Yes, so these recommendations, none of these recommendations make that a request or requirement. What we do allude to after in recommendation 1 is that we believe that once the board gets to, if we get to a point where we have this performance assessment established, that would be an equal a mechanism to allow access for multiple paths into the principalship, and it would be something for the board and the legislature to consider at that time without disenfranchising or disadvantaging anybody that's coming from a non-education pathway, but still make sure they're prepared for the challenges of leading a school and improving student achievement in charter schools. You'll see throughout the recommendations that LEAs, small rural LEAs, charter schools, we recognize there's a need to support them in a different way. So the grant, for instance, we talk about making sure the formula takes that into consideration so that it doesn't exclude small LEAs or charters from the opportunity to participate in that. We actually believe that administrators in charter schools have less support from a district perspective and also have some challenges that a principal in a traditional school might not have, especially a large school in a large district, and would like to support them.
But they wouldn't be required to participate in this.
Not through any of these recommendations.
Thank you.
Okay. Board Member Lisa Cummins.
Thank you, Chair Huntsman. Forgive me if I've missed this, but first of all, Erin, I wanted to give my condolences to BYU campus. That was a tragedy, and I'm sure it's being felt all over right now. With that in mind, I have spoken to a principal who said he doesn't care about academics right now because the mental health on campus is so egregious, is so over-encompassing that they can't function. And so he's like, we're not trained for this. How can I be a principal over academics when I have to be a counselor and ready to respond? They are currently first responders because of the Safe UT app. When Safe UT app is engaged, the first people that they call are the administrators so that they can then contact the students' parents. So he is up 2-3 times, maybe a week, early in the morning, on pins and needles, hoping that call is not a completion. How are we going to help our administrators be emotionally and mentally ready to take on this cascade of mental health that is in process of being? It's really concerning, because I think on the other hand, we're also going to be failing our students if we don't continue with the academics, because then they won't know how to function in the future. So I think we've got a bigger problem here than we're not addressing. So how, has that been discussed with leadership here in today's role?
Yeah, and I don't know, Valerie, if you'd like to respond to that, the discussions we had as a group, and you certainly live that on a day-to-day basis, so I'm going to push the speak button on.
I do think that is a big piece, and I think there needs to be more support, probably directly from school districts and representation that way, to be able to provide support, because I don't have extensive training with things like that. I rely on social workers that are in my school and then look for other opportunities for me to further my own learning. But I also do agree that there is a big connect between social and emotional well-being and academic success. I think they are intertwined. And I think when kids come to school and they can experience some kind of success academically, whether it's something really small, it does help with self-confidence, self-esteem, but it's not going to solve everything. So I don't think it can be all one way or another. I think it goes back to having caring people that are in the schools that are aware, that are trained to look for signs and provide the most support. And then it goes also to our leadership standards of being able to connect with what community resources and agencies are available and involving stakeholders and what's happening in a school to be able to support students' learning. Because it can't be isolation. I mean, it's a big team approach for how we educate kids. And educate is academic as well as the social and emotional piece. So.
Yeah, let's have a follow-up, and we have another comment. I want to remind you guys of our agenda still on our time.
So I understand all of that, but specifically to the leadership skills, is there support on when to know when to stop? Because, you know, a principal's jurisdiction or right is only so far, right? When does they stop, start being a leader for academics and stop being a social worker that's not licensed? I mean, there's a very thin line right now, and some don't know when to stop, right? And I think they're all scared, and I think it trickles down to the teachers in their schools, in the effect. And this particular school is on pins and needles. They're scared. And so how do we bolster up courage and hope and all of those things in a leader who can then showcase that to their downline? That's what I was hoping to see.
Yeah, so and Valerie alluded to this, in the educational leadership standards, it talks about their ability to create a safe and a productive and positive culture in the school, and there are several indicators associated with that. That's where that would fall into both the initial qualifications to be an administrator and then in the ongoing professional development.
Okay. Board Member Belknap. I just want to remind people we still have a motion on the floor, so. Okay, Board Member Belknap.
So I have a question to this exact thing. You were asked, Darren, about charter schools and their non-requirement of doing this. Are districts required? Will their leaders be required to do this? And are we making a separation? Would be number one. And number two, if we're not requiring it, why are we doing it?
Yeah, so if you look at the 15 recommendations, and then outside of that, the recommendation for the license credentialing rule, There's nothing in our recommendations that puts a requirement. We do recommend that the block grant, if that gets approved and you guys move forward with that, that in order to qualify for the block grant, whether you're an LEA, a small LEA charter, private, rural or large or a consortium, that you have a mentoring program in place. So that if you look through there, that really the only where there's a hard requirement is that we believe mentoring, 3 years of mentoring for your school leaders is essential to building their capacity and supporting them. So in order to get the funding, which the grant's not required, so wherever else in the rules and the policies it states who is and who isn't required to get a license, that's not part of these recommendations. But again, I alluded to the fact that under recommendation 1, once you have a reliable system in place to measure professional readiness for school leadership, we believe it supports multiple paths to get there, and it would provide leaders and leadership, policymakers, an opportunity to determine, should we require, no matter what path they take, whether they're a charter school or public school, should we require everybody who enters a school and has a responsibility for the safety of our students, the well-being of our teachers, and the academic achievement levels of our students, to demonstrate those before they enter the principalship.
Okay. One more
Follow
thing.
up.
May I call the question? Call the question, please.
Do we have a second? Second. Okay, we're voting to end debate. All in favor say aye. Those opposed? Voting is unanimous. Okay, the motion that's on the floor is that the State Board accept the School Leadership Working Group recommendations. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed? Voting was unanimous. Thank you. I'm going to move the schedule just a little bit. I know some people want to have a quick break. 7 minutes, board members. We've got to get back on. We're behind again. And then we're going to go right in. We're going to go to school fees, and then we'll come back to the school turnaround. So school fees is on deck. 7 minutes, board members.